Good afternoon, and welcome to the calendar year 2018 Annual Agency Ethics Program Questionnaire. I'm Patrick Shepard, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Wendy Pond, who is going to take us through some of the highlights of the questionnaire. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, thanks for having me. So the main purpose of today's presentation is to take the data from the 2018 Annual Questionnaire to help you think strategically about your ethics program. So I'm going to be sharing some data that we've already published in our summary report, but I have some of that in chart form, so there'll be some helpful visuals, I think.
Excellent.
I was going to say pretty pictures, but they are actually helpful visuals. We also have some new data that's not in the summary report that I'll be sharing that will help with some of the benchmarking.
Perfect.
So let's see. Okay, I'm going to do transition.
Yeah, right in the middle there.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, great. Okay, so this is the agenda today. I'm going to give just a little bit of background on the questionnaire, reminding us why we do it. I will then walk us very quickly through some screenshots of our website so you can see where to access this data. And then really the bulk of the presentation will be spent on this last bullet, which is benchmarking your agency. So in that vein, we're going to be looking at two practices that we pulled from the questionnaire, specifically whether agencies conducted self-assessments and whether agencies met with ethics, whether the agency heads met with ethics staff.
Okay.
And basically the benchmarking piece is, did you do one or both? If not, should you? What are the risks of not doing these things? We'll also provide some tips on how you can actually implement these practices in your program. So then we're going to turn to compliance rates, and we're going to look specifically at training and financial disclosure. And we're going to give you some charts so that you can see where does your agency fit in with the compliance rates that other agencies are experiencing. For both the training and the financial disclosure, we're also going to take a look at the uptake of the new requirements in 2638, the Code of Federal Regulations. And when I say new, I guess it's relative. We implemented these in 2017.
Right. Yeah, so we're in year 2 of the implementation, but I think we always knew that would be a bit of a process, so it's something we're keeping an eye on.
Yep, so we're going to take a look at uptake of those. Okay, so let's start with the background. So the Ethics in Government Act requires executive branch agencies to submit an annual report, and our regulations then further stipulate that the report is due on or before February 1 of each year. And so that answers part of the why do we do this. One, it's required.
Because Congress said so.
Right. But probably the more important question is why is it important? What do we do with the data?
Right.
So basically, the mission of OGE is to provide leadership and oversight. And so the program questionnaire, i.e. the annual report from each agency, is a way for us to fulfill that mission. As we know, agencies get program reviews every 4 or 5 years. And the annual questionnaire is a way for us to be able to check in and fulfill some of that oversight role in the intervening years.
No, it's great because we know that folks might not get visited every 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives us a window into everyone's agency each year.
Yep. And it also supports, like I said, our leadership role. We provide guidance and support to agencies, and the data from the questionnaire helps us understand where we might need to provide more support, more guidance.
Excellent.
And of course, underlying all of that is the need for transparency. And the transparency aspect is fulfilled when we publish this report, when we do these presentations and share the information.
Right, so it's not just for OGE to get a window into the program, but also citizens are able to do the same.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the background. I'm going to show you how you can access the information. Hopefully everyone's already taken a look at this, but if you haven't, this is a screenshot of our home page, and in the bottom right-hand corner of this image, you can see this kind of gold box. It's our open government box, and if you click on Learn More, you'll be brought to this page. There's a lot of information there.
There's a ton of information there.
And if you haven't seen this page, I would recommend taking a look because this is where a lot of the public go and press go to find different documents from OGE. One of which is
It's the annual questionnaire.
Exactly. So I've got a big red arrow pointing to where you can find that link. When you click on that, you get to the landing page for the annual questionnaire. And we've been publishing this data since, I think, 2014, so we've got the data going back that far.
That's good. So there's a historical record there. So if you want to see how things are going before, maybe you're a new DAO taking over a program, want to check out your trend lines, you could do that here.
Absolutely. And for each year, we publish both the individual agency responses. So when you click on those, this is what it looks like. And then from this landing page, if you click on Summary Report, you'll see this document. It's our summary where we aggregate all of the agency's responses into one report. And this in particular has a kind of an executive summary at the front end that tries to pull out some key data points. And definitely recommend taking a look at that and maybe sharing that with your leadership, particularly if they're new. This could be a good entree to ethics.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because it's not just that this information is important to OGE to help us support the community, but it should also be helpful to you. It's an occasion for you to think about how your program's doing, and if there are areas you're struggling in, you can use it in this occasion to talk to those people who can help you make it better.
Yep. Okay. So for the agenda, we've shown you how to access the data. So now let's get into the main part of the presentation, benchmarking. So we're going to first start with some agency practices, and I've picked two. The first one is, did your agency conduct a self-assessment to evaluate any aspect of the ethics program? So as you can see, 60% of agencies said that they did do a self-assessment. And that's great. We completely recommend this in a variety of ways of doing it. And we would like to see more. We'd like to see that 40% go down. We'd like to see a higher percentage of people doing self-assessments.
Yeah, and I think, people get a sense that this has to be a very formal process, that you need to ask the IG to come in and do an assessment or have a special internal program for conducting ethics program assessments. But something as simple as a bench audit or a desk audit can really help you. Pick an area that you're working on, see how your compliance rates are trending, see how your communication rates are trending, and pick some goals to improve next year. It doesn't have to be a big formal thing that results in a report. It can result in a couple of goals for next year's planning.
Yeah, I think thinking in bite-sized pieces makes it less overwhelming and makes it easier for you to go in and jump in and do it.
Absolutely.
So we want to share some examples from agencies. What we asked in the annual questionnaire, did you do the assessment? And then we asked, well, what changes resulted from the assessment? And so we pulled some examples that might be of interest to you. And definitely, these are just a few of the many.
Right.
So if you think these are some good ones or you're looking for something else, definitely go into the questionnaire and look at the fulsome responses. So here's the first bullet. One agency added additional language for applicant and new hire, for their applicants and new hires. And basically, it's their ethics notifications and requirements.
Excellent.
And what I like about this as a self-assessment piece is that it reminds us that we have new regulations, and the regulations can change and do change. Certainly, we've done more changes in the recent years than we have in the past, but these things happen, and sometimes they might slip through the cracks. I mean, OG does a great job of communicating, but people get busy, so taking a moment to do a systematic review can be really helpful.
No, absolutely. And we understand it's going to be a process for agencies to implement some of these new regulatory requirements. So if you're at a partial stage, making a goal, setting a goal to get a little further along, to get closer to full compliance next year is a really good idea, and a self-assessment can help you to do that.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes we think, okay, well, we've implemented it, and maybe it's just one part, but you didn't realize that maybe there's a couple of parts additional that need to come along. Okay, so second bullet, one agency changed the substance and tracking of the year of their annual training for their SGEs. And the submission of their conflicts form. And I think by conflicts form, they're talking about their financial disclosure.
Right. Maybe they have an alternative form.
Yeah. So I really like this one as well, because we hear from the agencies that it can be really challenging to track the SGEs and to kind of keep them on the farm.
Right.
In terms of ethics guidance. And so just taking that as a component for a self-assessment can be a bite-sized and doable self-assessment.
No, absolutely. And I think, ethics officials and the agencies are in the best position. So you all are in the best position to know where your risk areas are, to identify places to devote your energy and to look at them, measure, and then make changes.
Yeah. Okay, so this third bullet, an agency reevaluated which agency personnel should be required to file financial disclosures and documented the results. So, I mean, this is always a good practice, and I think we perennially are bringing this up as a good assessment practice. And as we know, confidential financial disclosure is risk-based. It doesn't really make sense to just say, well, we're going to have everybody file
Right.
it, because that defeats the purpose of having a risk-based system,
Right.
which is we want to be able to target our resources to where we think there's the highest risk.
And I think this kind of evaluation can provide immediate return on investment to ethics programs. If you're having too many people file, you're having folks file, that creates work for the ethics office. You have to review those, follow up, come up with counseling documents, whatever. It's a lot of work. And if it's not necessary, those are resources that could be placed in other areas of the program. So if you're resource constrained, one of the ways to look at self-assessment is as a tool to better deploy those resources.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's look at a few more. So this agency at their headquarters did a redistribution of their administrative ethics work, as well as the assignments among attorneys. And I like this one as well because assessments are a moment to reevaluate and reallocate to where you've got the strongest need, or maybe you've got talent that could be shared or talent that needs to be developed.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important because we all have challenges with resources. And in order to get more resources or to use them more effectively, you need to make a case. And that starts with having some data. So a self-assessment can help there. And I think also as we go into an election year, we know we're going to be under a resource crush.
Yeah.
And thinking about that now, how can we redeploy the resources we have to make sure we're keeping up with the work we need to do? Now is a really good time to start thinking about that.
So the second bullet, this agency implemented greater use of their ethics inter and intranet websites, and they connected different databases such as HR employee records and ethics records tracking systems. And I also really love this one because technology can be so powerful in terms of saving time. So there's obviously the outlay of time to develop the technology solution, but once that's implemented, having the systems talk to each other can be a boon, especially for larger agencies. The other piece that I like about this one is the fact that they're refreshing and revisiting what's on their inter and intranet, because I think one of the things that you and Cheryl often communicate is that training is not necessarily just the 1 hour training that somebody does for initial or annual training. It's really kind of the education and communications that you do all along the year. And doing targeted and timely communications on your intranet can be really powerful in helping to create culture and meeting people kind of in the moments where they might need help.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a risk management exercise, and the more accurately we can deploy those resources, the more effective they can be.
So there's this third bullet, an agency that created new intake forms to gather complex factual information regarding outside employment. So I know that some agencies use these forms to varying success, but what I like about this is it's a moment where it's a practice that helps the ethics official ensure that they're collecting all the required information that's helpful for them to do a fulsome conflicts review. Two last practices. One agency began preparing monthly status updates, tracking the status of financial disclosure reports, training, and post-employment counseling. Another agency revised their educational materials and their annual ethics communications to incorporate additional topics and specific ethics questions based on survey responses. So, I mean, the survey responses is great. This is something that we've suggested that agencies consider.
Absolutely.
It's a way to check in with your employees and see if you're being responsive to their needs. And clearly this agency has done that, and they have responded. They've revised their educational materials and their communications.
No, and this is great to see us. When we made the change to 2638, requiring agencies to carry out effective ethics training programs that are responsive to the needs of their employees. Well, to do that, you have to find out what those needs are. And it's really good to see agencies starting to do that work. And, we've recently issued guidance to help agencies do that, and we're going to continue to support that. So if there are tools we can provide, let us know.
Okay, so the other practice that we're going to talk about is whether the agency head met with the ethics staff to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the ethics program. And 73% of agencies said that they did their agency head did meet with the ethics staff, which is also great. But I think I would ask the question if I were an agency: am I in the 73% or am I in the 27%?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a concern because ultimately the agency head is responsible for the program. The DAO exercises authority that are essentially on loan from the head of the agency. So I think in order for that person to really lead the program and to have responsibility, they have to have information. They have to have communication with the ethics team.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder for the 27% that said that the agency hadn't met with them. Why not?
Right.
And what's going on, and what might change that would allow for that meeting to take place? There might be a concern that the DAO is not the right level within the agency to get that access, but I think that's less and less of a concern these days. I think that maybe most ethics officials maybe got in with their presidential appointee or their head of their agency the first year of the administration, and maybe there's a sense that if the program's going well, they don't need to get back in the door.
Don't need to go have a chat. Yeah, and we try and create, OG tries to create the opportunities or reminders that this kind of dialogue is necessary. And our director has recently released several publications dealing with this area.
Yeah, and to that point, this is a screenshot of the memo that our director, Emery Rounds, sent out to all agency heads back in October. And he's communicating the importance of ethics. He's gone around to all of the heads of the agencies, I think the cabinet level ones.
The cabinet levels who have Senate confirmed heads.
Okay, and he's met with all of them, and he's communicated this message in person as well. And basically the fact that meeting with the ethics team and inviting the ethics team to participate during planning and thinking through the programs of the agencies is a valuable practice. So I think that if you're in this 27% and you're looking for ways to get in the door, I think one thing is maybe reminding people about the people being perhaps the gatekeepers to your agency heads. Maybe it's the chief of staff or someone who helps with the scheduling. But if you need to make the case, you can point to the communications by our director. You can take this survey to them and say, hey, listen, we don't want to be in this 27% next year. We want to be in the higher percentage.
Right.
Okay. So let's go on. Those were the two practices that I pulled from the questionnaire, and now I want to talk about compliance with training and financial disclosure. So we're going to talk about initial ethics briefings very briefly. As most people, I think, realize, with the update to the training regulation, there are now three main training requirements, and one is that the individuals who are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, in addition to getting initial ethics training and in addition to getting annual ethics training, when they first come in, they need to get this initial ethics briefing.
Right.
And it's during that briefing that the ethics official discusses the ethics agreement signed by the appointee and discusses recusals and divestiture obligations, among other things. So it's important that this briefing be timely because it's a reminder to the appointee of some of the deadlines that are coming up, particularly in terms of divestitures, for instance. Also, we don't want them to be in too long without understanding all.
No, absolutely. The people who have just come into government service are at the greatest risk. They're not acculturated.
Yep.
They maybe don't have a sense of the new requirements.
Yeah, especially if they're coming from a non-government position. Into
Absolutely.
government. So let's take a quick look at the compliance rates. The 99% of agencies said that they were able to provide their briefing within the 15-day deadline for their Senate-confirmed appointees. 1% were late, and 0%, everyone got the training that needed to get training. And of the 1% that were late, that just represents 3 appointees from 3 different agencies. So I think those are pretty good numbers. Then we want to look at initial ethics training. So these are aggregate numbers. What we did is we asked agencies how many individuals were required to get initial ethics training and how many received it.
Okay.
And we aggregated those numbers. And of all of the individuals, 92% received their initial ethics training within the 3-month deadline, 2% received it late, and 5% hadn't received it.
Okay.
And I just want to be clear some people might think that, oh, that 5% could be, for instance, employees who joined at the end of the year and their training due date wasn't until the following year. But that's not what's covered here. These are the people that should have gotten it.
That didn't.
Didn't.
So these are actual failures to get people trained.
Right. And so just to put a real number on it, that 5% represents 18,000 employees. So when we asked across the executive branch how many employees were required to get the initial training, there was about 350,000.
Wow.
Across the executive branch. 18,000 didn't get it as of the time of the questionnaire being submitted. So that's kind of a high risk. 18,000 people who are new to government,
right?
Not being told what the ethics rules are, not being brought into the ethical culture of the agency. So, what are the risks there for the agency?
Absolutely. And if these people aren't financial disclosure filers, that may have been the one formal communication that they are required to receive during a career. So if they're not being supported through other ancillary communications or additional communications, we may have missed them altogether.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a concern.
So as I said, this is an aggregate number. So the next slide will be the benchmarking slide, because what the aggregate number, it's not any kind of average of agencies, it's just the total number of employees and the compliance rate for those employees.
So put another way, we had 300,000 people hired by the government, by the executive branch last year,
Yep.
and of those 18,000 people didn't get ethics training.
Right. Now what we want to do is look at a more agency by agency view, and that's what this chart is. So I'm going to walk you through this. Each orange dot represents one agency. We've arranged them alphabetically on the horizontal line, but that's really not the significant part. It's the vertical axis that we want to look at. It shows for each orange dot, i.e. each agency, the percentage of employees who still hadn't received their ethics training as of the date of the annual questionnaire. So what you see is that most agencies are down at the zero, that the cluster is here at the zero, which is good because it's saying
that means everyone's getting the training.
Right, so 0% didn't not get their training, but everyone did get their training. But if you look here, there's some agencies that are at the 50%, 60%, 40% of their employees that did not get the initial ethics training.
So that's a significant amount. And even if you're an organization with just a few new hires last year, that's still a large percentage. And even if it's 5 or 6, if it's 5 or 6 out of 10, that's not great.
Yeah. And so really this is an opportunity for you to take a moment and say, well, where do I fall in this chart? This is the benchmarking piece. How do you compare to other agencies? And what I would say is, I think it's important to think about trend data. So, if you're in the 50 or 60% mark here, and that's a one-off, maybe you take some steps to address that issue. But if you find that year over year you're in this kind of 50 or 60%, there's something more systematic going on that needs to be addressed, I think.
Yeah. Now, I know we've had a lot of turnover at the DAO and ADAO positions in the last few years. And that may also contribute to this, where you have a change in leadership of the program, or maybe no one was in charge of the program for a portion of the year. But if you're in that position where you're new to a program that maybe didn't get there, that's maybe an indication that that's somewhere that needs your attention quickly.
Right. Okay, so we looked at the 5%. Again, that was the aggregate number, and that belies the fact that there are agencies that have individually higher percentages. Of late or not being trained at all. So let's just take a quick look at this 2%. This is employees who just were trained but trained late.
Okay.
So let's do a little benchmarking here. Again, each orange dot represents one agency, and the cluster is appropriately around the zero, because for those agencies, all of their people got their training.
Right.
None of them were late. But there are some agencies that are at the 40, 50, and there's one at the 100% that their employees got late training.
Sure. And there are lots of explanations maybe for this. Maybe we have one hire and that person was late.
Right.
But it could also be that, we didn't realize we weren't doing this and we got it done at the end of the year or what have you.
Sure.
So if you're in one of those situations, find out what happened and see what steps you can take to improve for the future.
Yeah, and I think part of, we know that agencies perennially face the challenge of coordinating with their onboarding people, the HR people.
Yep.
So I think if you find that you're in the higher percentage and that's your problem, you can take this chart and say, we are standing out as an agency and the coordination will help us get our numbers back into shape. Okay, so let's talk about annual ethics training. We've talked about the initial ethics briefing for the politicals. We've talked about initial ethics training for all new employees, and now let's talk about annual ethics training. And this is required for those who file financial disclosure reports, plus a few other specifieds.
And anyone that AO discerns ought to.
Yep. Okay. So again, we're starting with the overall compliance rate for the executive branch. Of the almost 411,000 employees required to receive annual ethics training, 391,000 received it.
Okay.
Okay. So the overall rate is pretty good, but that belies varying levels of compliance within agencies. So this chart looks a little bit different. Again, each orange dot is one agency, and we're asking for each agency what's the percentage of employees who completed the required annual ethics training. So appropriately, most of the clusters at the 100%.
Right.
Okay. But again, there are some agencies that fall much lower. Some didn't get any of their employees trained annually. Some got, 80, 60, 70. And so that means, 30 and 40% of their employees didn't get the annual training.
Did not receive their annual training. So this shows you that the majority of agencies are getting to 100% compliance or very close to it. So if you're not in that group, something to consider.
Yeah, and as you kind of mentioned before, if this data point is not looking good for you, and the initial ethics training isn't looking good for you, and the financial disclosure, if you have a combination of places where your percentages are not looking good, then the risk is even greater for your employees because they're not getting all of the touch points that they need to get. Okay, so I promised that we were going to look at the uptake of the new 2638, Part 2638 requirements. So let's take a look at those. So in 2017, we updated the requirements such that all offers of employment to prospective employees must include a notice about the agency's commitment to ethics, a notice that the employee will be subject to the standards of conduct. It must provide the contact information for an ethics official, and it must provide a notice to the employee that they may have to file a financial disclosure report. And so we recognize that this type of notice does require coordination with HR offices, and for large agencies, it may be difficult for the ethics official to have close control over that process.
Okay.
And so for agencies that have more than 1,000 employees, the offices, the HR and similar offices that actually put the notices in and are responsible for doing that, these offices then certify to the DAO that there's a reasonable basis to conclude that the procedures are being followed.
Okay, so instead of counting individual heads, looking at individual vacancy announcements,
Right.
and calculating a percentage, these agencies, all they need to do is be reasonably assured that there are procedures in place to make sure that's happening.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And so what we asked in the questionnaire was, did all of those offices responsible for issuing that ethics notice regarding, to this prospective employees, did those offices provide the DAO with that required certification? 70, and we gave some options. So last year, the preceding year's annual questionnaire was just a yes/no question, but we wanted to try to get a more nuanced feel. So we changed the answer responses in the last questionnaire of 2018 to say, did all of the offices do it, some, or none?
Okay.
So we can see that 76% of all of the 76% of the agencies said all of their offices provided the certification. 11% of the agencies said some of their offices provided it.
Okay.
And 13% said none.
Okay. So some work to do at one end there.
Yeah. And I will say to this slide that just because the certification didn't make it to the DAO,
Right.
doesn't mean that the prospective notice, the notice to the prospective employee, didn't happen.
That's right. It may be happening. It may be the case that the DAO didn't find an occasion to go ask the chief human capital officer or the head of HR or whoever's responsible to provide that assurance. So maybe this is just a reminder to make sure you receive that.
And I think it's helpful to remember that the reason that we put this into the regulation is we heard from DAOs that they wanted more support
Right.
from us to be able to strengthen the coordination
Okay.
and some sense of authority and I guess authority is the right
Right.
word, to go to those offices and say, no, you guys have to do this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a challenge for a lot of agencies because the ethics program belongs to the agency. It requires the input of a lot of actors, not just the designated agency ethics official. And, we know agencies have that problem, and we try and find ways to help you marshal resources from other parts of your organization.
So we're hoping that you use this requirement to further that coordination. So let's compare. How does the uptake of this requirement in 2018 compare to 2017?
Okay.
So remember, 76% of agencies said all of the offices provided. So what we did in my comparison, and my chart's a little bit wonky, to kind of give the benefit of the doubt, in the 2017, the question was, did the offices provide it? It was yes or no.
Okay.
And in 2018, we wanted to have a little more nuance.
Yeah.
So we said, all or some or none offices that provided it. So I combined in 2018 the all and the some. So we've got 87% of agencies said that either all of their offices or some of their offices gave the notice. And so if you combine them, this is slight improvement.
Okay. So
Okay.
it looks like we're not going backwards, at least.
Yeah. So let's see. Scrolling down. And I think on that, we would like to see continued improvement. So
Right.
hopefully next year when we do this, we're going to be in the 90s.
Absolutely. And, and we know these are new requirements, and that, you have to create relationships and have the conversations with the people who need to do this work. And that takes time.
Yeah.
So, we provided this information. We're making progress. We
Yeah.
hope that continues.
Yeah. Okay. So initial ethics training. So again, in 2017, when we updated the program requirements, we included a requirement that all new employees get initial ethics training. So previously, they were supposed to get initial ethics orientation.
Right.
And that was essentially, at a minimum, time on their official time to review the standards of conduct. But now we've said, well, we want to go a little further than that. We want to actually have interactive training for the new employees, and it has to cover certain topics: financial conflicts of interest, impartiality, misuse of position, and gifts. And again, the regulations recognize that it may be an office other than the ethics office that provide this training.
Right.
And so accordingly, for the large agencies, the ones that have more than 1,000, if it's an HR or some other office that is responsible for the actual training, they just have to certify that there's a reasonable basis to conclude that the training has been met. So let's take a look. Again, we created nuanced responses this year. So 88% of agencies said all of those HR or similar offices provided the certification. 9% of agencies said some of the offices did, and 3% said none of the
Okay.
offices. So now how does that compare to 2017? So again, if you take all of the offices and some of the offices and combine that, you can see that we're at 97%. I think this, in comparison to the other one, this seems to be a stronger sense of improvement.
Absolutely.
And I think that, I'm not sure if that's maybe easier to coordinate on training than on notifications. I'm not sure why this is a stronger one, but it is. Okay, so now we're going to look at financial disclosure. And again, we're starting with the aggregate across the executive branch. And I've got the numbers for public filers and confidential of the, well, let's see, 26,000 filed of the 26,200 required. Approximately 381,000 confidential reports were filed out of the approximately 383,000 that were required. So it's really good compliance rate.
Right.
But again, that's based on how many employees across the branch were required and how many filed. But when you look at the individual agency, oh, I guess I don't have the individual agency. Okay. So, and I'm not sure why I didn't include that here, but one of the things I did want to highlight for this is, I know why, there's really good compliance. If we do the cluster chart like we did with the other ones, they're all going to be up
They're
around
all
100%.
up at the top.
Yeah.
So we don't have people who are just failing to do this all together.
Right. So the numbers here are really great, which is fantastic. Kudos to the agencies because it's a large effort. I think the one piece that I pulled out here that seemed to stand out was the extensions that were granted. So this chart's a little bit busy, so let's walk through it. The orange bars in each grouping represent 278Es. Those are the annual public financial disclosure reports. These kind of army green bars represent 278Ts, so the transaction reports. And this blue bar here represents 450s. And we don't have a corresponding one over here and over here because you don't do late fee.
There is no late fee for the 450, just the administrative sanctions.
Correct. So when you look at the extensions granted, this one kind of pops out. 17% of filed reports received extensions. So, and I do want to say that this is a proxy because we ask for how many reports were filed during the year and then how many extensions were granted. So it's possible that some of the extensions were granted for reports that were filed in the 2020.
So it may not be perfect, but it should give us a pretty clear idea.
Yeah. So I think it's a reasonable number to go off of. So I guess the takeaway here is a couple things. One, is this create risk for the agency to have so many people getting kind of extensions? And let's take a look. I did do. Oh, we'll come back to that in a second. So, what's the risk to extensions?
I think, particularly with the 278E, we're looking at data from the previous calendar year, right? So we're looking at the in the 2019 cycle, we were looking at the financial holdings for 2018, and we might not see that until May, which is quite a long time. To have information about someone's potential conflicts of interest that you've not advised them about. So I think there's some risk there, and I think agencies can take a lesson from this, that there's nothing preventing, especially public filers, from beginning the filing process at the beginning of the calendar year. I know that this is an area of great press attention now. The press is very cognizant, very aware of the timelines. They know when things are supposed to happen, when they should be able to receive things. And I think programs put a lot of pressure on themselves by waiting until May 15th to collect this information. If you could have it earlier, you have it earlier in the year, maybe ask for it as people are filing their taxes in April. You give yourself some time to resolve any issues before you have a problem.
And one thing I would add to that is I think that maybe, and this data doesn't show, so this is speculation, but I think anecdotally we hear about agencies automatically giving 45-day extensions. And I just want to throw out there for consideration that agencies can always give shorter extensions to minimize that risk. So maybe they just need an extra week, maybe they just need an extra 2 weeks, but we don't have to default to the 45 days. So this chart is also a little bit complicated. It's a frequency chart, and I just want to walk you through it. Basically, this is showing how many agencies granted what percentage of extensions. So I'm going to start left to right, but I think we're going to be more interested in the agencies that are on the far right. But just so you understand what this chart says, this 20 at the top here is saying that 20 agencies gave an extension to between 0 and 10% of their filers. This 29 says that 29 agencies gave an extension to between 10 and 20% of their filers.
Okay.
So I think our concern is as we get further over here, this 3 saying 3 agencies gave all of their filers an extension.
And it looks like, we have 7 agencies who gave extensions to more than 60% of their filers. And, again, that might be you just have a very small universe of filers, or that could be a sign of a significant challenge, maybe something you want to remedy next cycle.
Yeah, so in terms of benchmarking, I would say in general, we think that doing extensions is something that we don't want to be too prolific with it from an agency point of view, but also from the benchmarking point of view. If you're up here in the 3, the 1, the 7, the 8s, you're starting to be in outliers. Okay, so again, we're talking now about the new requirements in 2638, and we created this tool for ethics officials where we put in the regulation now that the Human Resource Office must notify the day of appointments to public financial disclosure positions and confidential disclosure positions.
In my experience dealing with agencies, this is like one of the perennial challenges. This is one of the hardest parts of getting the financial disclosure system to work correctly.
Yep, and so we asked agencies, so the orange is the public reports, the blue is the confidential. So you can see that, and we asked, 56% of agencies said that in all cases for public reports, they got the notification. 35% said in most cases for the public reports they got the notification. 5% said in some cases, 4% said never.
Okay.
That's for the public. And then the blue is the confidential. So I'm just going to skip to the kind of the not great numbers. 10% of agencies said only in some cases did they get notification, and 7% said never. So those are in red because we feel like those are the areas that need some attention.
Yep.
So again, what's the risk? And I think agencies are acutely aware.
I think they understand. It's just making the process work that's so hard. You have someone who doesn't receive initial ethics orientation. You may have, in this case, you have filers who are coming in with assets and financial interests that pose potential conflicts, and you may not know that for some time. It may not be till the annual process. And having been through this with an agency, the last thing you want to do is hire someone for a job, have them serving in that job when they have sort of irreparable potential conflicts or actual conflicts, because it can be a nightmare to unwind, and it's really not fair to our incoming employees.
Right. So let's take a look at, this is the new requirement that the Human Resources Office notify the day of terminations from public filing positions. So again, 56% of agencies said in all cases they were notified, 36% of agencies said in most cases, 4% said some cases, and 4% said never.
Yeah.
Okay. So this concludes for the 2018 data.
Okay.
I hope that it's helpful. I'm going to take a moment to plug and remind people of the presentation we did last year. We did a presentation on ratios developed from the 2017 responses to the annual questionnaire. And I bring this up because this whole first part of the presentation is about benchmarking and self-evaluation. So taking the approach from 2017 and possibly even using the data from 2017, because it probably hasn't changed that much.
And it's certainly good enough executive branch wide to see where you fit in.
Yes.
If you're using this year's data to compare yourself to similarly situated agencies from last year, that's a fair comparison. That's still an apples to apples comparison.
So what we did in 2017 is we calculated key ratios, such as the ratio of full-time employees to one full-time ethics official, the ratio of 278s per ethics official, of 450s per ethics official, the ratio of employees required to receive training per ethics official. So I just want to give you a visual so you know what this is, and that you can go back and take a look if you're interested. But we broke it also into cohorts. So I mean, this is could be really valuable data. We broke it into agencies that are bigger than 10,000 employees, I think between 1 and 9,000, less than 100, I forget what the breakoffs are.
Right.
But it's designed so that you can benchmark yourself within your cohort.
And I think it's really important because if you're one of the agencies that's struggling in one or more areas and one of your challenges is insufficient resources or cooperation, this data from last year can really help you make a robust case about how well or improperly your program is being resourced, and that's a case you can take to the people in your organization who can help with the resources.
And the one thing I'll say here, which is what we said last year, we view these ratios as one piece of data to be used in a more fulsome and comprehensive understanding of how your agency is doing.
Right.
We do not think that there is one ratio that's the
No,
right
that's
ratio.
perfect. No, of course not. And I think the complexity of the work changes agency to agency. But if you find that you're not getting there and you have a sense that the reason is because you don't have the resources, you can go see if that's true. You can say, look, we're an outlier in resourcing and we're an outlier in compliance. Those correlate very strongly for us. We think the solution may lie in sharing some workload or greater cooperation or more human resources.
I want to also just point out that we put together a worksheet last year, and I think this is part of that evaluation and benchmarking, where you can plug in your ratio for, say, initial ethics training. This example shows that an agency has 260 people who are required to get initial ethics training per ethics official, but the average for that cohort is 97. When you combine that with other data points, like we've got this thing called compliance indicators, so how many people were trained timely? How many people were trained late? And then even further, information that we don't have but that you have, what do you know in your agency that can help you think about whether the training is effective and accomplishing what it needs to accomplish? So in this example, an agency surveys their employees, and 70% report better understanding of their ethics obligations. So if you can take a moment to use this chart to think through both the ratios, other indicators that you have, and then identify a few action items. Just doing one line, that's a self-assessment. You
Right.
guys are already going to be able to say yes next year to the self-assessment question on the annual questionnaire, but more importantly, you're going to actually be able to have some actionable items.
I think that's really important because that's why we do this exercise, is to help agencies do these kinds of assessments, plan effectively, set targets for change, and continuously improve the programs. And we'll make sure that these slides and a link to the previous presentation are available in the course description of today's course. So, you want to go back, watch the video, you want to access these materials, they'll be in the course description here shortly.
Okay, so that's it. Anything else we need to talk about, Patrick?
No, I think that brings us just about to 45 minutes. We did really well time-wise today. So, if you guys have ideas, we always look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much, Wendy, for joining us. And if you have ideas or